On that issue of speech, just to break it down a little further, there have been attempts to pass various legislation at the national level that would definitely infringe upon First Amendment rights. The first one I want to talk about is the Antisemitism Awareness Act. The ACLU, again, has been very publicly against this legislation. I believe Jenna Leventoff, who's a ACLU National Senior Policy Advisor, wrote to the Senate back in November of last year, and I'm quoting from that letter here. He says, instead of addressing anti-Semitism on campus, this misguided legislation would punish protected political speech. She also wrote, it would likely chill free speech on college campuses by incorrectly equating criticism of the Israeli government with anti-Semitism. I'm just curious to see what you think of Leventoff's analysis of that bill, and if you agree with her.
I agree with her 100%. There is serious concern for these about these bills that try to define anti-Semitism, because they do exactly what my colleague says, which is that they would um, conflate criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism, and I think that is deeply flawed. And so it's not just the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act in Congress. There are state versions of these
Yeah.
bills as well, including one that's simmering in New Jersey, and we're opposed to that bill at the state level as well.
Yeah. Um, and in terms of understanding the legality of the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act, part of the bill would direct the Department of Education to adopt the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, right? The International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. And in a case called Students for Justice in Palestine v. Abbott, which was decided in October of last year, a Texas federal court found that the IHRA definition most likely violates the First Amendment. In that holding, the judges called it a viewpoint discrimination and held that the definition is also overly broad and would therefore be unconstitutional. Would you agree with that kind of holding? Does that reasoning from that court make sense to you?
It does, and that's exactly what we've been telling lawmakers here in New Jersey, is that this is an overbroad attempt to try to define, so let me rephrase. This is exactly what we've been telling lawmakers in New Jersey. It is, it is an attempt to censor people's speech, and the definition that folks are trying to push would censor speech, especially on campus, that may be critical of Israel. And we can't have a definition that would undermine the First Amendment, right? It would
Yeah.
clearly undermine and chill speech across New Jersey. And so when judicial rulings that say that, bills like these are likely unconstitutional, that should be a wake up call to lawmakers who are trying to pass them. And, they should realize that not only are they doing harm by censoring people, they're not doing much to address anti-Semitism either. And so I think this is a way for lawmakers to feel like they're doing something without having to do anything. And in fact, what they're doing is suppressing legitimate speech.
Yeah. And let's talk about, some of those lawmakers and, maybe their potential motivations in supporting these acts. Senator from New Jersey, Cory Booker, he not only voted for the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act, he co-sponsored it, right? Would you say that it's fair? Is it fair to say that Cory Booker is acting against a New Jerseyans' First Amendment rights by co-sponsoring a bill like that?
Yeah, look, I think there is a real problem of anti-Semitism, whether it's
Yeah.
in New Jersey or beyond. I think I've seen the data. Hate incidents against Jewish community members have increased. I think there are better ways to address it than by trying to define anti-Semitism in a way that hinders speech and doesn't actually get at the problem. And I'm disappointed with any lawmaker that thinks that this might be a way to solve anti-Semitism, because clearly it's not.
Yeah.
And so what I feel is happening is that people are kind of losing the plot, right? Like we are doing something that we think is going to address a problem, but it's not going to address it. It's actually going to cause harm in another area that,
Yeah.
that is, that's going to be more problematic long term. And, the thing about the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act is that, if it passes, if we decide that, the IHRA definition or any other definition is the right one, and these definitions are overbroad and they end up violating speech rights, then the next religion that comes along is going to want a definition,
Yeah.
and there's going to be a definition of Islamophobia. There's going to be a definition of anti-Hindu bigotry. There's going to be a definition of
Yeah.
anti-Christian bigotry. And all of these things are going to chip away at speech rights. They're going to chip away at the values that we hold dear. But just because speech is speech that one disagrees with or one finds offensive, it doesn't mean that it's right to censor it or that there should be a criminal punishment for expressing those views. But I'll go back to saying that the anti Semitism definition that we're seeing is not doing anything to protect Jewish communities.
Yeah.
What it will simply do is chill or censor criticism of Israel, which a lot of people believe is legitimate.
Yeah. Um, just to stay on this topic, so there's another piece of legislation, Senate Bill 720, the Israel Anti-Boycott Act. I believe it was Senior Staff Attorney, ACLU National again, Brian House, that wrote that this act would criminalize peaceful political activism, exactly what we've been talking about, and that this act would infringe on First Amendment rights. And once again, it's Senator from New Jersey, Cory Booker, who co-sponsored this bill, voted for this bill. And if you remember earlier, we were talking about politicians disappointing us, not just as a once in a blue moon type of thing, but repeatedly and systematically disappointing us. Do you think, again, his actions, which are clearly against the position of the ACLU, are an infringement of Americans' First Amendment rights?
You were asking me about Senator Booker. He's been, um, eh, not only has he been, uh, look, let me say this in a way that I actually mean it. Uh, look, every lawmaker, regardless of at what level they're at, has things that we align with and things that we disagree on. And so, Senator Booker is no exception. He's been a champion with us on a number of different issues, including on criminal legal reform, cannabis legalization, and so many others, helping the most vulnerable among us. And we've also disagreed on things, including the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act and other things that he's sponsored over the years. And one of our greatest strengths as an organization is that we get to have honest conversations with lawmakers, including Senator Booker. He will tell you himself firsthand that we disagree on a lot, and we tell him when we disagree. And so we're going to continue to champion our values and protect New Jerseyans' rights. And I don't think it's fair to paint any one lawmaker as saying that they are going to undermine the constitutional rights wholesale of our communities, because there are things that Senator Booker and others have done that uplift and protect and defend the constitutional rights of our communities. But there are also things that they've done that potentially infringe on the constitutional rights of our communities.
Yeah.
So just as individuals are complex, so are lawmakers. I would hope that they would vote the right way or do things to um, uh, protect rights more often than they do.
Yeah.
I think it's important to make sure that we are making our voices heard and holding lawmakers and others in power accountable to the laws that they pass, so that and the constituencies that they serve, so that we are not perpetuating injustice.
Yeah. And I completely hear you, and I agree with you that Cory Booker has, pushed a lot of legislation that is very helpful in a lot of different ways, like the cannabis situation. But, it's important to parse that out because each piece of legislation is different. The
Yep.
forces moving behind them are different. And the motivations for politicians to behave differently on different legislations are different. So just to talk about what could be potentially Senator Booker's motivation behind these two bills that we just talked about. The Intercept reported that in 2019, Senator Booker gave a speech behind closed doors to AIPAC. In this recording, it showed that he said, in reference to Mort Friedman, AIPAC's president, and I quote here, that Senator Booker and Mort Friedman talk often and text message back and forth like teenagers. And I have another report here from Open Secrets that shows super PACs like DMFI, NORPAC, JAC, FIPAC, APAC collectively have given Senator Booker almost $900,000 towards his campaigns over the last decade. We'll talk about the two different aspects of speech here, one which is Citizens United and the role super PACs have to play. But do you think that this financial support and this kind of revolving door dynamic that politicians can sometimes maintain have a direct impact on the way they vote? And in this case, do you think Cory Booker is impacted by this money as to how he votes?
I mean, I can't speak for him, but I think it's important to see these where politicians, um, m- you know, I think it's important to see corporate donations to lawmakers. Like I think it's important to understand where money is coming from and how it's influencing our politics. And uh, but I think it's important also to hold lawmakers accountable and make sure that regardless of where their money is coming from or where their campaign donations are coming from, that they are uh, adhering to principles of justice and fairness and equality, and that they are doing right by their constituents. So
Yeah,
I can't opine on Senator Booker's motivations,
of course. Yeah.
and I would encourage you to talk to him and his team about that. But he definitely has he has both a track record of being a champion, and there are some instances where I think he needs to evolve.
Thank you for that.
Hey there, if you liked that video, then subscribe to my channel, click on the link in my bio to follow me on Instagram, X, and more.